Hey guys, Dev here. I hope everyone's having a great time at this year's Game Developer Conference. I know Gamergate did, at least with the GDC hashtags. And because we over at the Sharpfire Otaku channel are opportunistic twats, I'd like to talk to you about something related to the GDC. Namely, the International Game Developers Association. Here's a brief history taken from the IGDA's own website. The IGDA was initially established in 1994 by Ernest Adams as the CGDA, the Computer Game Developers Association. Its main reason for being was to give game developers a unified voice in the wake of the video game debates happening in the American Congress that same year. In the Escapist's article on the subject, titled Let's Get Together, Adams describes the founding in greater detail. According to his own words, Adams went to the CGDC board and asked them to let him create the CGDA as a department of the conference itself, an association within the business. The CGDC he's referring to is the Computer Game Developer Conference, which would later become today's GDC. The IGDA began as a division of the GDC, back when the GDC was its own company. In 1995, the IGDA's predecessor became an independent organization, even though its members and staff were still the members and staff of the GDC. Adams says the IGDA's primary function was, and is, to support the careers and interests of developers as individuals, not companies, which is a fine goal, but I'm not convinced the IGDA actually has game developers' best interests at heart. Around the same time as the IGDA's birth, the CGDC was sold to UBM, and became the GDC we know and love today. UBM is the parent company of Indie Games Fest, which I've already talked about at length in another video, and Gamasutra, one of the corrupt publications that Gamergate is boycotting. Officially, the IGDA did become its own separate entity from the GDC or any other UBM-owned properties, but on paper it didn't quite work that way. The IGDA employed CMP for operations and management services up until 2004, CMP being what UBM called itself before a name change. Even after 2004, there continues to be significant crossover between the two organizations. Now let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. The IGDA is an association that brings developers together to have a unified political voice, to have them collaborate and push each other's work, and to stand up for their own collective interests. It's almost like a union. However, not really, although an anonymous indie dev who spoke to us expressed the hope that it one day would grow into a full-fledged union for game devs, but more on that later. Now, the IGDA sprung up from the same roots as the GDC, and was owned for a time by UBM, and still has significant membership and staff crossover. This is what is known as, in other industries, creating a cabal. Suppose you were a small developer starting out. Do you want to have a fair shot at your game winning in the IGF? Do you want to have your work covered by Gamasutra? Do you want to show off your game at GDC? Well, if so, you're gonna have to join this developers association, which claims to speak for your rights, but is financially and socially intertwined with the parent company of all of these other events and outlets. The IGDA and UBM have essentially created a gateway to enter the gaming industry. The message they've sent to indie devs is clear. If you want to be a part of this industry, fall in line with us. It's blatantly unethical for award shows, journalism publications, and public conferences to have these ties with a union-like association that claims to represent the interests of its members in an unbiased manner. Not only is there no guarantee that the association won't pander to the interests of its corporate buddies rather than its members, there is also the obvious avenues for favoritism towards members over non-members at these supposedly fair events. This would be like if you worked in a factory and the union that represents you was originally owned by the same parent company as the factory, and the union's staff were all the same people that ran the factory. Do you think you would be fairly represented in a dispute? And we can't forget the whole Blockbot debacle. People opposed to Gamergate's investigations into their unethical practices, and who wanted to push a narrative of harassment over the truth of corruption, created a Blockbot. The public face of what would become known as the GGAutoBlocker was Randy Harper, but its creation involved a lot of people. GGAutoBlocker, when used, would automatically block a list of users on Twitter who were determined to have been pro-Gamergate and therefore anti-corruption. However, GGAutoBlocker only became relevant when the IGDA began using it, and in doing so, began to block indie devs who had spoken out against corruption, including its own members. The IGDA publicly endorsed the Blockbot, even as its own Puerto Rico chairman, Roberto Rosario, was blocked by it for his objection to Jordy Tate's comment that all Gamergaters be sent to Nazi gas chambers. In retaliation, the Puerto Rico chapter of the IGDA was closed. The shitstorm that descended upon the IGDA by its own blocked members was colossal. What didn't help is that the list that the GGAutoBlocker used was distinctly called the blacklist, and that companies colluding to blacklist individuals from an industry is illegal under US law. The IGDA quickly backpedaled, with the current chair, Kate Edwards, saying that the blacklist bot was a third-party tool, that they weren't involved in its construction, and that the IGDA will stop using it. Except that none of it was true. One day before Edward's denial of involvement on Twitter, Donna Pryor said that a bunch of people had their fingers in the blacklist bot, with WIG taking the major load of work. WIG is the IGDA's Women in Games group, and Donna Pryor works for the IGDA in several capacities. And despite what they've said, the IGDA still uses it. Camera Lady's never spoken to Kate Edwards before, and yet here she is, blocked. Not only does the IGDA endorse the blacklist bot, it's no third-party tool. It was created by a division of the IGDA to block its own members who speak out about corruption, and they continue to use it to this day despite the lies they told to get indie devs off their back. Now here's where things begin to get really interesting. A number of indie devs have actually been willing to speak with Camera Lady on this topic. Some were entirely okay with going public, while others wanted their names censored out of fear of reprisal from the IGDA. Pixel Metal, the dev of the indie game Sombrero, said that most indies are wary of pissing off the IGDA due to the collaborations and promotions the IGDA provides. Many people simply aren't willing to talk about the IGDA, the IGF, GDC or Gamasutra due to the Cabal's influence. Another person Camera Lady spoke to about the IGDA and its unethical links to UBM's properties, who never specified about whether or not he wanted to remain anonymous, so we've erred on the side of caution and censored him just in case, said Silverstring, Lego Butts, Ismail, Schaefer. All their relationships and collaboration. Quinn got caught out by being a manipulative asshole. But as a game dev, it became apparent that there was a definite web of cool kids. Many with no actual game dev skills, just loudly supporting causes. They trick new game devs into thinking they're the top, but they're simply the loudest. The real game devs are mostly too busy working. The anonymous indie dev from earlier, who hoped the IGDA would eventually reform and become a full-fledged union, has a different opinion on the IGDA than everyone else. Thus far, evidence points towards UBM and the IGDA working together to create a gateway into the gaming industry, with the IGDA acting as UBM's enforcement arm to keep questioning developers in line. However, this individual paints a different light. They say that the IGDA doesn't act as UBM's muscle, but rather it is intimidated itself by UBM, just as much as individual developers are. The IGDA itself is a very fickle organization that tends to go whichever way the wind is blowing. Right now, UBM asserts the most pressure, so it sides with them. However, the potential is there for the IGDA to become an ally of ethics in our industry if UBM's stranglehold on them is broken. Now, this analysis of events is just as plausible as the more commonly held viewpoint that the IGDA is complicit in the suppression of developers. But at this point, the question must be asked. If the IGDA is not the tool that UBM uses to enforce order on developers, then what is? The anonymous dev says that UBM directly strong-arms devs who step out of line with general social engineering, but also GDC access, Gamasutra coverage, and the IGF, making the IGF significantly more corrupt than we first thought back during the Phil Fish investigation. And there are ongoing investigations into the IGF's conduct, but they deserve their own video. I'll end it off with a message to any and all developers of any size who are listening. Two narratives have been presented here. The first is that the IGDA is the hammer that UBM wields against you. The second is that the IGDA is kept down by the Cabal just as much as you. Only you know which is the truth, and I encourage you to speak out. But regardless of which is true, is this the game dev that you dreamed about joining as a kid? Did you lie awake at night, thinking not about how awesome your game idea was, but about how best to pander to self-important personalities who hold sway in your industry? Did you enter the IGF only to be told that your game was good and too bad it's not going to win, or that somebody's boyfriend was going to win and that was that? Do you actually want a game developers union willing to stand for your interests? You have to speak out. This is as much our fight as it is yours now. If what's happened to Mark Kern recently is any indication, the Cabal is beginning to turn on game devs who speak out against corruption. It's not just gamers they're gunning for now, you are their next target. When gamers contradicted their narrative, we were painted harassers, misogynists, and terrorists, all for doing some computer chair investigation. What do you think they're going to do to you, game devs, with your actual insider knowledge on how they're gaming the system to their advantage? I know you love this industry, but unless you speak out about the corruption you've seen, there's not going to be an industry left to love.
You're actually not even nominated for anything. We want you to hand the awards to other people. Great, I said. And then I immediately set to work planning my revenge video, where I discredited the awards and exposed all the conspiracies that caused me not to win. I've decided tonight I will not be making any jokes about Gamergate. All of tonight's Gamergate jokes will be made by this sock puppet